Ever since Super Mario Maker released in 2015, people have been wondering just how far this concept of a game where you can create and share your own custom levels could actually go. And admittedly, I am one of those people. In fact, in the early years of this channel, I made several of my own concept trailers showcasing how other Nintendo franchises would look like if they borrowed from this premise, from games such as Zelda Maker to even Kirby Maker. Back then, Mario Maker was such a new concept, and we really didn't know what Nintendo was going to do with it, or if Nintendo would do anything with it at all. However, Super Mario Maker 2 releasing on the Nintendo Switch essentially solidified this concept as its own series, and I've got a feeling this won't be the last time we get a Maker game. Of course, there's so much they could add for a Mario Maker 3, but honestly, this idea of taking the Maker concept and running with it has never really left the back of my mind. So many series could benefit from this treatment, and so in this video, I want to discuss what truly is next for the Mario Maker series, and if the next game even has to be a Mario Maker game at all. I have several ideas to go over, and I'll be discussing how each game could work, and also how likely I think each game is. So with that out of the way, let's move on to the first idea. Starting off with the most obvious choice for the next Maker game, we have Mario Maker 3. It really wouldn't surprise me at all if Nintendo just puts out a new Mario Maker on every console they make from here on out, especially because of how much online is really required to enjoy the series. It just makes sense to always have a Mario Maker on the current Nintendo console, and with a new console coming out soon, if Mario Maker 3 came out within the next few years, I would not be shocked at all. The biggest reason we wouldn't get a Mario Maker 3 is because arguably there's not enough content to justify it, but let's be honest. I think a lot of people who doubt a potential Mario Maker 3 are actually just forgetting how many possible Mario games they could build off of. We're obviously missing iconic power-ups like the penguin suit and the hammer suit, but there's even several entire 2D Mario games that are almost completely unrepresented, like Super Mario Land and Mario Bros. 2. Hell, now we've even seen Nintendo put 3D Mario games as styles in Mario Maker 2 with the introduction of the 3D World style. So imagine if games like Mario Odyssey or Mario Galaxy got similar treatment. It is definitely possible. However, the biggest thing that I think would be an absolute game changer for Mario Maker 3 is the addition of a Super Mario Bros. Wonder style. 2D Mario was on a major hiatus until Wonder reminded everyone what makes this series so dang special, also while completely redefining what a 2D Mario game could even be. Of course, seeing the new Wonder enemies or items like the elephant fruit in Mario Maker would be so cool, but the obvious biggest feature would absolutely be the Wonder Flower. You could, of course, use some preset Wonder effects in your levels, with maybe even some completely new ones specifically made for Mario Maker, but also imagine somehow being able to create your own Wonder effects or stack other Wonder effects together. That would lead to endless possibilities. So yeah, Mario Maker 3 would, in a lot of ways, keep doing exactly what the series has already been doing so well. It would expand upon what we already have with even more content by adding in new styles, power-ups, enemies, gizmos, and more. It's also worth mentioning that some quality of life changes are definitely in order. Frankly, the way you find levels in this game just needs to change. There is so much garbage that absolutely pollutes the course world. Finding good levels that are actually fun should be easy, rather than having to dig through a bunch of garbage to find one hidden gem. My other biggest complaint about Mario Maker 2 was the fact that you have to download levels to play local multiplayer. I remember playing this game with a friend the week the game came out, and it was such a pain having to download every level we wanted to play together, and on top of that, a lot of the levels weren't even good. Like, how am I supposed to know if a level is worth downloading to play in co-op if I haven't even played it yet? Regardless, I think it's pretty fair to say that Mario Maker 3 is the lamest game we'll talk about in this video. And while I definitely think it's the most likely, it's not like I would be disappointed at all if it did get revealed. I mean, with the Wonder style especially, being able to create your own Wonder levels would be a blast in and of itself. That being said, we've already gotten Mario Maker 1 and Mario Maker 2, so we can kind of imagine what Mario Maker 3 would be. Let's take a look at some of the different routes that Nintendo could take with this series, especially if they're willing to get a lot more creative. Moving on to something that's been considered for a long time now, 3D Mario Maker. With a 3D Mario Maker, you could still keep the Mario branding, but this would also be a major shakeup. Being able to create entire 3D levels based on games like Super Mario Sunshine, Galaxy, or Odyssey, that would be nothing short of epic. Mario 64 is kind of the perfect example of this, since that game has already been used for a ton of different mods, and we've already seen some really incredible creations even without Nintendo making an official Maker title. In fact, someone actually already created a Mario Maker Maker 64 mod, which pretty much lets you do exactly what a 3D Mario Maker should. A 3D Mario Maker would offer so much creative liberty, and it has the potential to be the perfect way to showcase how powerful Nintendo's next console is, because obviously a 3D Mario Maker would be much more intensive than just lining up a few blocks and putting in some enemies and power-ups on them. One of the coolest parts about this game would be setting the pace for your own levels. You could have a galaxy level where you have a bunch of planetoid structures connected by launch stars, or a sunshine level that's a boss rush where you only have one health point. In a lot of ways, this would be like Mario Maker as we know it, just on steroids. I personally think a Super Mario 3D Maker would be legendary, and while it definitely sounds really fun, I do have to wonder if this is really the right choice for the future of Mario Maker, cause there are definitely a few setbacks. On top of the larger hardware requirements, this game might not be very user-friendly. Think back to the first Mario Maker trailer we ever saw. When the menu popped out and you could see the hand drag objects into the level, the concept was immediately apparent. While this might have made the gameplay more simple, it wasn't really a bad thing at all. In fact, I'd argue it's actually a really good thing. A lot of Mario Maker's appeal came from the fact that it's so easy to understand. You do not need a master's in game design to make a Mario Maker level. I mean, clearly, have you played the random levels in this game? The difficulty was not in using the tools you were given, rather it was in taking the tools that were already easily accessible and designing a fun and creative level. With 3D level creation, the luxury of being able to pick it up and make the level you want would be pretty much impossible. And this is pretty much true with designing anything in 2D versus 3D. Drawing something in Microsoft Paint is much simpler than creating a 3D model in Blender. Probably the best way for them to implement a 3D Mario Maker level designer would be to allow you to walk around and control the camera as you place objects. Basically like Minecraft creative mode, but with 3D Mario. My other concern with 3D Mario Maker is just how many pure garbage levels there would be. As I said earlier, in Mario Maker, the level design is fairly simple, but like, have any of you guys looked at the course world in that game? There are so many awful little Timmy levels, from having the flagpole right next to the start, to levels where you have to find a random dev door or invisible block to even beat them. If these are the levels we have with a simple level creator, imagine how much worse this will get with even more convoluted and confusing level creation tools. There would definitely have to be a better filtering system this time around. I know it might seem like I have a lot of criticism when it comes to 3D Mario Maker, but I genuinely love the concept. If anything, all of these hiccups would be a fairly small price to pay for how awesome of an experience this game could potentially be. However, with the amount of effort this game would take compared to say a Mario Maker 3, on top of the fact that this game would objectively be a lot less accessible to most players, while I definitely think a game like this is possible, I wouldn't say it's the most likely game to get the Maker treatment. Now let's take a journey and dive into some series that would be completely new to the Maker formula. Let's start with The Legend of Zelda Maker. This was actually the first concept trailer I made for this Maker series all the way back in 2018, so I definitely hold this idea close to my heart. Back then, I actually called it Super Zelda Maker, but if I were to guess, I think The Legend of Zelda Maker would be the more likely name. Anyway, is something like this actually possible, a non-Mario Maker game? Well, I think it is, and honestly, if we did get that, I think Zelda Maker would be the perfect place to start. We've already gotten the Link power-up in Mario Maker 2, why not just give us the real deal? Now let me just preface this by saying I am not talking about 3D Zelda, no, definitely not. All of the criticism I just gave for a potential 3D Mario Maker, you can take that and crank it up to 11 for a 3D Zelda Maker. I love 3D Zelda, but with how bizarre some of the puzzles can get with Zelda titles made by actual game developers, I don't even want to imagine what Ocarina of Time would have looked like with dungeons made by 8-year-olds. And like a Breath of the Wild style, yeah, good luck buddy, your Switch is blasting off to the moon. That being said, a 2D Zelda Maker would actually translate really well. Instead of power-ups, you have items. Instead of question mark blocks, you have chests. And instead of flagpoles, you would finish a level by collecting pieces of the Triforce. The real question is, what would the actual gameplay look like? In Zelda, you don't just go level by level. There's usually a massive overworld that you travel across as you discover various dungeons. However, realistically, the actual levels you design would just be those dungeons. You would be able to connect various rooms and then fill them with a bunch of different enemies, bosses, potions, items, pretty much everything you would expect to find in just about any standard 2D Zelda dungeon. In Mario Maker, we already have a bunch of really creative puzzle levels, but in this game, the main focus would be this puzzle element rather than seeing a bunch of really tight platforming levels that require a ton of skill. Obviously, there would still be very difficult levels though. You could basically create a bullet hell, akin to something like Enter the Gungeon, just by placing enough enemies down. Another reason I think Zelda Maker would translate really well is because we already have have a good amount of styles. If you took Zelda 1, Link to the Past, Link Between Worlds, and then the Link's Awakening HD/Echoes of Wisdom style, that would give you as many styles as Mario Maker launched with. When it comes to 2D Zelda, there certainly is no concern about not enough content being available. Going back to Link's Awakening HD, it's worth noting that we kind of already got a Zelda Dungeon Maker, to an extent, in the form of that game's chamber dungeons, where you could go talk to Dompe and basically combine preset rooms to form your own dungeons. Albeit this is a very dumbed down version of the concept, I do think it shows that a Zelda Maker is at least possible and something Nintendo has toyed with. Lastly, I want to talk about multiplayer. This was one of my favorite additions to Mario Maker 2, and it would be a must-have for a Zelda Maker. We've seen a handful of Zelda games that already incorporate multiplayer, such as Four Swords Adventure, and just like Mario Maker 2, this game offered both competitive and cooperative experiences. Having some kind of couch co-op or even online multiplayer where you could run through a bunch of Zelda dungeons with friends would be absolutely sick. I've always thought the concept of a game like Four Swords was really cool, and this would essentially be the ultimate version of that. Overall, when it comes to Zelda Maker, while it would definitely be very different from Mario Maker, I think if Nintendo wanted to expand the Maker series onto other franchises, this one would just make the most sense, given that Zelda is obviously a very popular and recognizable IP, but the core gameplay would be different enough from Mario Maker to completely warrant its own thing. The next Maker game we have to talk about is a Happy Maker. In fact, you can play this game right now, because you would make me very happy if you hit the subscribe button. Seriously, we're so close to 250,000 subscribers, and that's like a lifelong dream of mine that we're actually going to hit. So if you could help us get even closer to that milestone, it would really mean a lot, and we have so much banger content coming out soon that subscribing's the best way to see it. Alright, let's move on to the next actual Maker game. Next up is Metroid Maker, another game I've made a full concept trailer for, and once again, we are not talking about 3D Metroid. Frankly, a 3D Metroid Maker would make absolutely no sense. The levels would be incredibly boring since there would be no story or even original gameplay aside from some pre-designed assets. Going forward, just know that every game we're going to talk about, we're not even taking 3D into the equation. When it comes to 2D Metroid though, it's similar to Mario in that it's side-scrolling, but it's also similar to Zelda in that you don't just go level by level. Rather, there's one giant map that you play on throughout the whole game. I think the way to translate the Mario Maker formula to Metroid specifically would be about the same way it would work for Zelda Maker. Like with the dungeons, the way you could design a level in Metroid Maker would be by taking a bunch of different rooms and then combining them. So a level could consist of maybe 10 to 20 rooms. That may sound like a lot, considering you can only have 2 rooms in Mario Maker, but keep in mind that rooms are much smaller in Metroid since they only take up one screen. Even though Metroid doesn't really have something like dungeons in Zelda, there are subsections in Metroid games. For instance, in Dread, there are several different regions of the map that you could travel to, so a level in Metroid Maker would probably be a lot like one of these regions, but perhaps a bit smaller. The way I see it, Mario is very platforming focused, Zelda is very puzzle focused, and Metroid has always had puzzle elements alongside technical challenges. Metroid Maker might just be the perfect Maker format game, since you can easily design a level based on your preference, whether you want to make a level that requires some really difficult movement and perfect weapon usage, a level with a lot of puzzling problems, or a level that features elements of both. Looking back at the concept trailer I made all the way back in 2019, level parts like enemies and terrain would be pretty straightforward, working identically to how they do in Mario Maker. However, items would definitely be replaced by abilities and upgrades. In Metroid games, the gear you have is constantly upgraded, and these upgrades are permanent, giving you abilities like being able to turn into the Morph Ball, survive hot climates, or even shoot different missiles. I imagine in a Metroid Maker, you would choose which abilities you want to start with when designing a level, all the way up to being maxed out with abilities, or all the way down to having a zero suit. Then you could place upgrades sparingly throughout the level. As for the styles, I had originally chosen Metroid, Super Metroid, Fusion, and Samus Returns in my concept trailer, but instead of Samus Returns, I would say Dread now makes a lot more sense since that is the new, most modern 2D Metroid game. Lastly, a really interesting idea I had was multiplayer. I know Mario Maker already had this, but this would be a first for the Metroid series, apart from some spin-offs, side modes, and I guess that Nintendo Land minigame. Seriously though, Metroid Blast from Nintendo Land is an absolute banger. Having a Metroid multiplayer debut in the Metroid Maker game would be so perfect. Ultimately, while I think a Zelda Maker makes more sense for the time being, I can't deny that a Metroid Maker would be really cool to see. And even though it probably wouldn't be the next Maker game, it definitely is a must-have if we get more Maker series in the future. Kirby Maker is yet another Maker game I made a concept trailer for, this time back in 2020. One of the largest setbacks for this game is likely the fact that Nintendo doesn't own Kirby. HAL Laboratories does. However, Nintendo has always published these games, and also Kirby is practically a Nintendo character at heart since he's been in Smash from the very beginning and also exclusively releases on Nintendo consoles. I really don't doubt that if Nintendo or HAL wanted to make a Kirby Maker game, they absolutely could and would. Kirby also just makes a lot of sense to get this Maker treatment, since it's a side-scroller with a heavy emphasis on platforming, not puzzles, just like Mario. There are also so many Kirby games from across different consoles. Trust me, styles would absolutely not be an issue. There are potentially dozens of these that they could add. Aside from this just being a Kirby game and not a Mario game, the gameplay would be generally similar, just by how the levels themselves are created. A major difference between Mario and Kirby, however, is the fact that a lot of enemies in Kirby double as power-ups as well, due to copy abilities. This could be absolutely devious in levels, and just an absolute troll. Like, imagine, you need the fire ability to burn some crates blocking an exit, and then the hothead enemy you need gets crushed and dies if you don't arrive in time. Obviously, this would make for some really cool and interesting levels as well, but I could definitely see this system being used for pure evil. Other than that, is there really that much left to say? It's Kirby Maker. The concept alone is pretty self-explanatory. Even multiplayer could be identical to how it is in other Kirby games, where each player controls a different color Kirby. I would honestly say this is one of the more likely games to bring the Maker series out of its Mario shell. On top of Kirby being a pretty large series, it also wouldn't be that hard to make, especially since it has that same charm Mario Maker has, where you could just easily pick it up and immediately start making levels because it's an easy to understand concept. Alright, this might be one of the coolest ones in the entire video. Let's move on to Pokemon Maker, or I guess PokeMaker. I think this would make sense primarily because Pokemon is so huge. In fact, it's literally the largest media franchise in the world. But that's about the only reason why this one is possible. Just to be clear, I think PokeMaker would be awesome. In fact, this was the most recent of the Maker concept trailers I made, and it's also my personal favorite one. Being able to create different landscapes to travel around, pick which Pokemon you want to hide in a patch of grass, or set up trainer battles with custom text, it's a sick concept. You could pick a bunch of different styles from different generations, and maybe we could even see newer Pokemon get new sprites in older styles, just like how enemies such as Bowser Jr. are in Super Mario Bros. Despite not actually existing when that game was originally released. There's so much they could do with this, but my main problem with this idea, or at least pertaining to how possible it is really the question, who is this for? In Mario Maker, you can share and play levels on a whim, but can we really expect your average player to create, design, and share their entire custom Pokemon game? Probably not. Pokemon games can take dozens of hours to beat, and realistically, the average player would probably have no clue what they are doing. Additionally, it's hard to break a Pokemon game into smaller chunks like levels or dungeons. Maybe you could create your own gyms with different gym leaders, each with their own set of Pokemon, and have people fight against those, and while that's an interesting idea, it's really only a fraction of the Pokemon experience. When I play a Mario level, whether it's one made by Nintendo or some random kid on Mario Maker, if I run and jump, I feel as though I am playing a Mario game. Having a game without Pokemon encounters, without exploring different regions, without filling out the Pokédex, whatever that is, I'm not even really sure if that is Pokemon. So overall, it seems like it would be just about impossible for a PokeMaker to actually do a good job while representing the Pokemon franchise with practicality. It would be a sick idea, but I think this one is best left for a fan to try and make and hopefully not get struck down by Game Freak or Nintendo, rather than us getting a full-fledged release, no matter how fun it would be for the people who actually were willing to put in the time and effort and make full Pokemon campaigns. As I was thinking of series to go over in this video, one series that I was so excited to talk about was Donkey Kong Country. The Donkey Kong Country series is simply incredible, with Tropical Freeze being one of the greatest 2D platformers of all time, and for some reason, Nintendo just hasn't made a new Donkey Kong Country game in over 10 years. Like, what the hell is going on? Nintendo had an entire direct for the Donkey Kong Country Park in Super Nintendo World. DK was a major part of the Mario movie, and we're even getting an HD port of Donkey Kong Country Returns. Nintendo will do literally anything Donkey Kong before they make a new Donkey Kong Country game. A Donkey Kong Maker would be sick just for the sole purpose of actually having a new 2D Donkey Kong game. Or I guess infinite, because now we could make our own. Despite being a 2D platformer, Donkey Kong Country is surprisingly unique from Mario. There aren't really Donkey Kong power-ups. Instead, you have animal buddies like Rambi, the rhinoceros that rams into crates and takes down enemies. There would be a lot of unique gizmos too, like barrels that could send you flying, or minecarts that you could use to glide down tracks. A Donkey Kong Maker game would be sick, but if I'm being honest, while I love this as a concept, I'm not sure how great it would be in practice. I love Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Country. They're some of my favorite games of all time, and because of that, I can also recognize what makes this series so great, and that's the flawless level design. Take a game like Tropical Freeze. With every level, there's something completely new thrown at you, and a lot of these are things that couldn't be recreated in a simple level editor. Enemies will attack you from the foreground and background. Sections of the level transition between 2D and 3D. Bosses have intricate stages rather than the standard jump on their head 3 times and win. On top of that, Donkey Kong Country levels are not grid-based at all, where you can look at any 2D Mario level and be like, yeah, I could probably recreate that in Mario Maker. Donkey Kong Country games throw so much unique stuff at you and are constantly innovating to a point where I don't think you could actually make a Donkey Kong Country Maker. Realistically, levels in a Donkey Kong Maker would have to be much simpler. I think what makes Mario Maker so fun is the amount of creative expression it gives you, but with DK as an equivalent, a lot of the creative level design would be completely erased, and at that point, could you even compare the levels we could make to an actual Donkey Kong Country game? None of this is to say that a DK Maker wouldn't be fun. I'm sure it still would be. Rather, I just don't think that Donkey Kong would really benefit from this treatment, whereas a lot of the other games here would make perfect sense as Maker games. So yeah, honestly, if any time at all is being allocated to a new Donkey Kong game, I just want Retro Studios to do what they do best and create another masterpiece like they always do. Lastly, the final series that I think could get the Maker treatment is Mario Kart. I know that this is wildly different from the other games here. It's not 2D, it's not a platformer, but it honestly just makes so much sense. I think the way you would design tracks would be with some sort of top-down overhead view, and then you could connect a bunch of panels in the order you want to. Visually, it would probably look a bit similar to the World Maker from Mario Maker 2, but you could add all kinds of elements to each panel, like railings, grass patches, ramps, boost panels, enemies, or even item boxes. A lot of the panels could also be pre-designed with these objects built in. I don't think the track design system needs to be that complex. Sure, these tracks may not be as visually stunning or unique as the tracks in a game like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but do they really need to be? One of my favorite tracks in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is Mario Circuit 3, and that track looks like baby vomit. It's also just a flat plane with some grassy areas, but the track's actual layout is so fun just because of the amount of opportunities for mushroom cuts. A track like that could be easily replicated in a track editor, and I guarantee you there aren't that many tracks you could create that are actually worse than like Baby Park. Now, just keeping it a buck, I highly doubt the next Mario Kart game is branded as a Mario Kart Maker. And that's not because the idea is bad, as much as it is that the fact that Mario Kart is just already so massive. With Mario Kart 8 Deluxe being the best-selling game on the Switch and Nintendo's second best-selling game of all time, I doubt Nintendo has much interest in rebranding Mario Kart when it's performing at its peak currently. That being said, I wouldn't say that the Mario Kart Maker dream is completely deceased. I think a new Mario Kart would certainly need to have its own tracks, but what's stopping them from adding a track building mode alongside these tracks, just like how Smash Ultimate had its own in-depth stage builder? That way, for most people who probably just want to play some traditional Mario Kart tracks, they'd have several cups to race on. But a full track builder and the ability to share those tracks could also be a major selling point for people who want to have a Mario Kart experience that feels really new. And to be honest, I don't know how many other ways besides a track maker they could ever one-up Mario Kart 8 Deluxe with its massive roster of 96 tracks in the first place. As for whether or not a track builder is even something Nintendo would consider, I think it's worth noting to an extent Nintendo has already kind of made a Mario Kart Maker in the form of Mario Kart Live Home Circuit. Now, the track in this game is something you actually build in person, so that's obviously very different, but they did make an entire game sort of dedicated to this concept. To be clear, I'm not making this comparison to say that this is proof Nintendo is actually making a Mario Kart Maker, or that Nintendo even wants to make a Mario Kart Maker. Mario Kart Live Home Circuit is honestly more of a toy than a video game. However, it does suggest to me that at least the idea of being able to create your own Mario Kart tracks is at least on Nintendo's radar. But with that all out of the way, these are just a few ideas for how I think Nintendo could completely transform the Mario Maker series so that it embraces even more of their franchises. Obviously, some of these are way more likely to happen than others, but I do think that any of these would be cool if Nintendo let it happen. Let me know down in the comments below what series you'd like to see get the Mario Maker treatment, and if you did enjoy this video and want to see some more Mario Maker content, be sure to check out this brand new video we made talking about 100 new items that we could get in a standard Mario Maker 3. Some of these items come from past games, some of them just come from our own twisted imagination, and I think it's a great video, so go peep it. I'm Thomas from the Switch Stop signing off. Peace, guys.